Hello, this is Harry Watt at North Carolina State University Wood Products Extension. This is a video version of a slideshow given at 6 workshops in the northern United States that was part of a Wood Education and Resource Center and U.S. Forest Service grant program to support small sawmills. The importance of small sawmills in the local economy is to give a pathway for materials that could come out of the forest and support the economy and benefit our citizens here in the United States. This is a grant that took place that created 6 workshops in 2021 and 2022 in 6 of the northern states that included Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, New York, and New Hampshire. 280 persons attended these workshops, and they were full with a wait list to get in. We were limited by space and seating. At the bottom is my email address and my website for NC State, NC Wood. Anyone that would like to get up with me, I'd be happy to help someone if I could. Both NC State and the Wood Education Center does not discriminate in any way, and anyone who has an issue with discrimination can contact the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture, North Carolina State University, and the Wood Education Center. The U.S. Forest Service in the 1970s created a log grading system for factory hardwood logs, and it followed the industry practice of having grades 1, 2, and 3. And these grades are defined by the position in the tree, such as a butt log or an upper log, the scaling diameter in inches, the length without trim in feet, the required cuttings on 3 of the best faces, because each log has 4 faces, and the upper grades have clear faces, the lower grades have increasing levels of defects. The maximum sweep and crook will downgrade logs, so even though they may have clear faces, if they have crook or sweep, they will become lower grade logs if they're excessive. The maximum deductions for sweep and crook and other problems is shown there, 40, 50, and 50%. So basically what the Forest Service has done here was try to create a standardized grading system that could be used throughout the eastern United States regarding factory hardwood lumber logs. One of the interesting things that they did at the same time was this study, and it created a publication, NE468, which for many species took a group of logs and sawed them and then measured the lumber that came out. So if you look at the left side, you see the scaling diameter from 13 inches to 31. You see they did 420 logs, and they grossed about 100,000 board feet. They scaled the logs on the front end with the International Quarter-Inch Rule and the Scribner Decimal C rule, and then they measured the lumber by grade. And these are actual yields for dry lumber grades. And if you look at the numbers, it's interesting. The upper grade lumber is approaching 40%. FAS, F1 face, select. One common and below made up about 60% of the wood, but almost 30 of that, which is half of what didn't make the upper grade, is one common. So the lesson here for us small sawmillers is there's a real yield increase with better logs. So better logs cost more money, but they pay for themselves by better yield. When you get into the log grades, we saw that chart that shows us what an F1 log is. And it's basically a log that has nice faces. At least 3 of the faces look good. And a face on the log is like 1/4 of the diameter. So as we're trying to grade the logs, we want to look at the faces. And if we have logs with good faces, they're probably going to be an F1 log. But as we get into F2 and F3 logs, we gain more defects and we have less clear face. And if you look at the chart, you can see that the diameter requirements for F2 logs compared to F1 is smaller diameters and more defects. And F3 logs are even more defective. And when we look at the yield in that report, you will see that the grade yield drops from the FAS, the face 1 face, and selects drops as the lower grades are increased. So basically, to sum it up on the grades, is you can look at logs to see how good they are. The better the logs, the more valuable they are, and the more wood that's the higher grade will yield out of them. But when we get into sawing, we do have these sawing patterns. When we look at being on a sawmill, it's really useful to diagram the log. And something you could do as a small sawmill is to scale a log before you saw it, and on paper kind of diagram how you saw it, and then evaluate what did you get out of it. And this is useful for looking at the products. Did you cut all 1-inch lumber, which is 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 8/4, timbers, and so forth. And you can look at your time. For various sawing patterns, you'll have different times, and different patterns take different times and will yield different products out of the log. So it's really important to relate how you saw whatever pattern that is and the products you get out and how valuable those products are. So when we think about sawing, grade sawing around the heart means that we take advantage of the knowledge that the inside of the log is low grade typically, and the outside is probably the higher grade. So grade sawing, we're going to be spinning the log around a lot, trying to make clear board, separating the clear wood from the not clear wood so we get more upper grade wood. Quarter sawing is a special technique that allows woods that have a lot of rays like oak to showcase that by making smaller boards that have like a 45-degree angle of grain in them. And then live sawing slabs is the new thing a lot of people are doing, is we're sawing all the way through the log and leaving 2 bark edges. So this is basically what most of us are looking at these days in sawing patterns. And what I'm really talking about here is mainly sawmills that are just single mills, the band mills especially, without a lot of auxiliary equipment like gang resaws and band resaws that larger mills might have. Now here's a diagram that shows tapered sawing. Now we have taper in logs because as a tree grows, it's going to be bigger at the bottom than it is at the top, so every log we cut has a taper. And the question is, how do you deal with it? And it's kind of interesting. Here you see live sawing where they're showing here vertically all the saw lines going straight across the log. And if you look at the left front one on the top, it says split taper. The right top one says it's going to be the taper to one side. So whether you have a band mill or a vertical mill, you can still live saw. And then you get into a cant, and what that is showing you is you create a cant, then you resaw the cant, and you're taking edge boards around the outside and so forth. So this is just diagramming, showing you what you can do with the taper and what the effect that it has. Most of our larger mills have hydraulic lifts on each end, so you can pick up whichever end you want to, and you can split the taper. So if it's 20 inches on one end and 16 on the other, we can bring it up 2 inches so the taper is equalized 2 inches at the top and 2 inches at the bottom. So you can ignore the taper and you'll get more cross grain in your lumber. You can pick the log all the way up and eliminate, you end up transferring that taper to the center of the log, If you saw parallel to the grain, you'll get better lumber. It's harder to do, and most people don't do it, but you end up with your taper going to the cant in the center, which is okay because that's the lowest grade wood. One of the issues that we have in logs is how do we buck the log? And here in the top diagram, we've got a log that's got the sweep on each ends, but in the center is a straight one. And the first one says incorrect, and what that means is we didn't get all the straight in that middle log. So we're going to benefit value-wise to put as much straight as we can in one log instead of sharing it to all three logs, because the ones on the end are still going to be low-grade logs. They're still going to be tapered, and we're not going to get as much value out of this one on the ends as we get in the middle. And if we look at the one on the bottom, we've got the same thing. Is we want to maximize the best straight that we can get, and this is what we're saying. So when we look at logs, and this especially occurs for people that when they're logging tree length material, and we have to buck it either at the landing or at the mill. So we have to be careful how we buck, because it does make difference in the yield and the value. The log sawing axis here is, as long as we haven't sawn the log, we can do anything with it, but as soon as we make that first slab cut, we really are indexed in what happens to the rest of the log. And there's two theories on where you make the first cut. One traditional way is you cut the best face first and you work from there. The other method is to cut the worst face first. So when you cut the first face, it determines the other three faces. So you want to put the defects on the edge of the wood, the edge of your boards, when you do these face cuts. And the whole idea is it's a chance it's going to be edged off when we get the bark edges off if we're making square edge lumber. So we want to put the defects on the edge, and then we can take them off as we edge. So if we plan how we saw the log, it makes a big difference on the value and the yield. A lot of people, when they put the log on the mill, roll it around to where it's fairly stable, and that's very understandable. But that may or may not open up the faces that are the most for you. Putting the log and rolling around doesn't eliminate any defects. It just determines where they show up in the board, and you really don't want large defects in the center of the board, because that really limits the length of good wood, and that is a negative on the grade. This is grade sawing, and here what we're trying to do is to shift the log around several times in a circle and try to cut the best boards that's left to us. And if you look at this log, this is going to take a long time to saw this log. And when I counted up, I came up with 34 saw lines, where a saw line is one trip through the log. And we're going to be turning this log 9 times. So grade sawing is slower. It's designed to get the most value out of the log. And there's been all kinds of studies of whether it really works or not. But it is commonly used in the hardwood industry, especially when we have the head rig and not a lot of equipment after it, like gang saws and other resaws. So in this example, you see the face 1, face 2, 3, and 4. So we saw face 1 first, and we go down ever how far we decide to go down before we stop and flip the other side. So as this log was sawn, there was 1, 2, 3 saw lines, then we flipped it. And then you count the next, and then we go 3 and we cut down so far, and we go 4 and we rolled it till we got it all down. So one of the things you learn in the small sawmill business is you pay attention to how you saw the logs, and if you're lucky, you will learn over time how to get the value that's in the log out. The log doesn't get better than when you first get it. It can only degrade, and you can lose a lot of value in a log by not sawing it properly. So that's the little song and dance here for the grade sawing and other sawing here. It does pay to do some diagramming and try to match how you saw with what really makes sense for you. And I encourage you to have a good enjoyment with your sawmill and sawing logs, and may everything you do be profitable. Thank you.